Okay. All right. So, nuclear power, is it safe? Presented by me, Keegan Odell. So, what is nuclear energy? So, how we get nuclear energy or power is through a process called fission of uranium 235. Um, this process releases a large amount of energy, as you've seen in nuclear bombs. That's how nuclear bombs are made, or how we get their giant explosion, is through fission of atoms. Well, how do they do this? How do they split atoms? Well, they take a neutron, they slam it against a larger atom, splitting it, then creating releasing a huge amount of energy, which splits more atoms and becomes a chain reaction and becomes a giant explosion. That's how they make nuclear bombs, anyway. Well, in a nuclear power plant, they do the same process, but that energy is, very hot, becomes super hot, and then is transferred to water. And the water boils, creating steam, which is used to generate a turbine, which I'll show you in the next slide. Well, you might ask why these power plants don't just explode as soon as they start the fission process like a nuclear bomb. Well, that's because they have these containment rods in the reactor, so they can dip these rods in to kind of mitigate the reaction, making sure that it doesn't just become chaotic and spread to other atoms. Um, and the heat itself is controlled by the water as well, and coolant. Well, after the water inside of the reactor is boiled and steamed, the steam transfers through the lines, goes into a turbine, like a steam powered engine, turns the turbines and generates electricity. Well, so what are the benefits? So it generates nearly 800 billion kilowatt hours of electricity each year, and produces more than half the nation's emissions free electricity. So, for our non fossil fuel electricity production, only 30 power plants, the research I could do is there's about 30 power plants in the country, nuclear power plants, and they create 800 billion kilowatt hours only using uranium. Well, it's a very efficient source. Like we said, it's a huge amount of energy that we're transferring to electrical power. And at its current uses amongst the world, which is about 400 power plants, it's estimated that uranium 235 could sustain for 200 years. And it's not too hard to find, it's not too obscure. And the other benefit is that power plants are a huge operation. They require tons of people to work there. So big job openings. Oh, and then this image right here is that's actually off of a government website. This is a capacity factor. So essentially, if countries, the world, were to invest its economic systems, how much power you could generate through nuclear, way outdoes any form of energy at all, not even just emissions free, because you can see fossil fuels, which is the next one over, is not even close. And it's the next best thing. It's our main power source right now. But nuclear would way outdo it, way outperform if it were to be invested into. What are the consequences? Well, everything has a cost. Um, well, most of you probably already know that using this nuclear process um, produces a lot of radioactivity, and there's radioactive waste. So this radioactive waste has to be contained, and if it's not treated properly, or something gets contaminated, there can be high risk for cancer. There's actually high risk for cancer for the workers who work at these plants. Um, one point that I'll probably talk about more is how expensive they are to build. They are crazy expensive to build, and probably the main reason why there's not more of them in operation right now. Mining uranium can sometimes pollute the water, and there's potential disaster. I'll talk about that some more too. But again, we're trying to control this insane amount of energy, and if that's not controlled, can lead to major disasters. What would it change if countries were to take advantage of all the benefits and invest all their money into nuclear? Well, we'd completely topple over the emissions game. We would completely revert. We would not have a use for fossil fuels, essentially. um, to produce electricity. It would, like shown earlier in that graphic, it would outperform the current energy system greatly, almost doubling it. Um, and it wouldn't be a short amount of time. It would actually last. The uranium 235 right now would last for a decent amount of time, past any of our lives, anyways. And again, helps get on the path of mitigating climate change. It has no CO2 emissions whatsoever. And then kind of talk to more about those disasters and part of the reason or politics of why it's not used more. Some of you have probably heard of Chernobyl or Fukushima. Uh, Chernobyl is a city in Ukraine that had a nuclear power plant. In 1986, one of the reactors exploded because there was a test being run. Um, it was a disaster. Spread uh, radioactive dust thousands of miles away from Chernobyl, putting millions of people at risk for cancer. Um, Killed, I think, 50 workers at uh, the nuclear power plant itself, and the city right now is no longer habitable except for the very outskirts. Fukushima is kind of the same thing, except it was more due to natural causes. There was actually a tsunami an earthquake shut down the electricity there, and then a tsunami flooded the backup generators, shutting them off, and kind of over time, the reactors became too hot, exploded, and that's in 2011. That's pretty recent, and was devastating. We're still today trying to prevent. Like there's bans on fish products that come from Fukushima or around Fukushima. People up to 12 to 20 miles away had to evacuate the area before Fukushima actually exploded. And again, there's huge risks if it's not mitigated for radioactivity and cancer. And these are my sites and sources. Those are my sites and sources for images. And that's my summary handout. Thank you very much.